Hi, this is Mike from 850 Armor Works, and in this video series we're going to go over something that we get asked quite a bit. How do you finish a resin helmet? But before we get started with that, we're going to explain why a resin helmet is something a little bit better than, say, a 3D printed helmet. So to explain this, we're going to go over the stages that a printed helmet goes through before it reaches the molding stage where we start to finish a resin helmet. First, as many people are familiar with, we have 3D printed helmets. Now 3D printed helmets, they're going to have print lines and all sorts of craziness all over them. All this ends up getting sanded. And then after we have a sanding phase where pretty much everything is smoothed out and seam lines are filled in, it goes to a priming stage. And the priming stage, majority of all the print lines are filled in, everything's been sanded, and then that will bring you to the molded helmet stage where everything is nice and clean, you don't have any 3D print lines. Now let's have another benefit of a resin helmet here. Resins come in a variety of materials, and the most sought after is an impact resistant helmet. Because when we're wearing these helmets, when we're using these helmets, when they're finished, we tend to carry them about like this. And what can happen when they're like this? Now here's one of the things that can happen when you're carrying a helmet or even just working on it. Oh no, I dropped it. Well, and you pick it up and nothing wrong with it. No cracks, no damage. That's the point of an impact resistance and one of the benefits of using a resin helmet versus a 3D printed helmet. Now that we've explained kind of why a resin helmet is better than potentially a 3D printed helmet, and you can see the less amount of work that's involved with getting these ready, I'm going to start going over with you step by step of what we do whenever we're finishing a resin helmet. Now, when you receive your resin helmet kit in the mail, we have already partially cut out the collar right here. We do this for packing reasons and for us to check the interior to ensure that there's no big globs or resin hasn't pooled up in one area. Basically, we're doing our quality assurance. So the first step that we're going to do is finish cutting away this neck ring. And we're going to do that using a rotary disc. So we're going to start out by cutting the collar here with the rotary disc attachment. These are your standard Dremel bits, like fiberglass reinforced cutoff wheels. So one of the things that you will definitely need is going to be a Dremel tool. Now you're going to see me using a Fordham TX here, which is basically a big dentist drill. It's foot controlled and variable speed, so I can control it at any rate that I need to with this flexible shaft. So let's dig in. Now that the majority of the neck ring has been cut off, we're going to take it to the next step, which is over the belt sander to do some final edge cleanup. Okay, for the next step of the cleanup, I'm taking it over here to a belt sander. It has an adjustable base, nothing real special about this. The belt grit's a pretty coarse grit, probably about 50, but we're just going to go through and finish cleaning up any jarring. Now that you can see that we're done with the belt sander phase, we've cleaned it up to a very nice and smooth edge. You can go over this by hand with some sandpaper afterwards. So now we're going to move on to cutting out the islands. For cutting out the islands, we're going to use several different tools. First one, we're going to try to cut out the majority back with the cutoff wheel. And we're going to switch to a smaller rotary wheel right here. And for larger areas, we're going to use a handheld fine belt sander. Well, let's see how much I can cut out with the fiberglass wheel first. Now that the majority of it's been cut out, I'll go ahead and see if I can pop a good portion of it out. It may require a little additional cutting. Well, got a nice little chunk out. And pretty clean all the way around. So I'm going to go ahead and use this handheld belt file. It has an adjustable speed setting here too. All right, I've cleaned up about as much as I can with this little belt sander. We're going to go ahead and switch over to a finer bit now. All right, now that the majority of the island is cleaned up, we're going to take care of the fine details by hand, just using some sandpaper. And now we have a semi-wearable and see-through helmet. So let's go on to the next most important step, which will be washing the helmet. The next step is going to involve washing with a degreaser like Simple Green to remove any residual mold release that was on here during the casting process. We're going to take that inside to our sink, spray it down, rub it down, and wash it off. So for this step, this is the washing phase. I'm going to wash it down with a degreaser like Simple Green. And that's it. We have a squeaky clean helmet. Ready for the next phase, sanding the seam line and detail work. So for this pretty much last step, we're going to be going over sanding down the seam line right here. Seam lines and helmets are almost a absolutely necessary thing for two-part molds. We will not get rid of them completely when we're making a mold. So there's always going to be a residual seam line left. We'll take care of it pretty simply with a palm sander and some 150 grit sandpaper, followed by any little detail areas need to be cleaned up with a file and potentially a little bit of hand sanding. We'll also be able to take care of any imperfections that are left in the helmet that we may want to sand down. It's a lot easier to sand resin than it is sand 3D printed parts. We're going to be doing about the same amount of filling and painting and sanding either way. So when we're sanding this resin, it'll get it nice and smooth and we'll be happy. Now the seam line has disappeared, so I'll take the file and get in any little tiny areas that a sander can't. So now I'm going to take some 220 grit sandpaper and go ahead and go over all the areas where I rough sanded because there's a huge difference. But I'm also going to go over the entire helmet to give the surface a slight tooth so the paint has something to stick to. All right, that just about wraps it up. Now it's almost ready to paint. Got a few more details to do on it, but other than that, this is close to start running through paint. So hope you enjoyed this. Hope it opened your eyes up a little bit to the ease of finishing a resin helmet, and we'll see you on the next video.